Coming up, just when you thought you knew fact from fiction, turns out one can sound a lot like the other, and you might be surprised at some of the places where the line starts to blur. It's Stranger Than Fiction tonight on B Squared, and it all starts right now. Greetings and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Brandon Bridges, and this is B Squared. So one thing that, as far as I know, all judges have in common is that they all have the same title, the Honorable insert name here. And you'd expect an honorable judge to behave honorably, right? I mean, it's right there in the title. So how do you reconcile that when you see judges behaving dishonorably? For that matter, how do you tell the difference between a judge that's tough but fair and one that just doesn't have the temperament to sit on the bench? Our guest tonight is an attorney that can help us answer that question. You may know him from his own successful YouTube channel, as an occasional sufferer of technical difficulties, and as the host of an odd 8-hour live stream. Let's welcome Artie of Artie's Corporate Fiction. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you for having me, B Squared. Yes, people already know I'm Artie of Artie's Corporate Fiction. I have a channel here on YouTube where the primary goal is to discuss, debunk, and review pseudo law such as sovereign citizens, First Amendment auditors, and the occasional Karen. And I appreciate you having me on.
Yes, sir. It's absolutely our pleasure to have you here. And I think we've got a good show for everybody tonight. So I'm calling this one Judging the Judges because that's the most creative thing I could think of. And what we're looking at is the difference between jurists as we see them on television and as they are in real life. And as I hinted in the opening, the line isn't as clear as you might otherwise think it is. And let me share an anecdote to illustrate why this is such an important topic. So, about a decade ago, I was coming back from a job overseas, and on the connecting flight from Atlanta to RDU, I was sitting next to a federal judge. I said hi, said what I did, asked what she did, and we got to talking. And I asked her the question that I think judges like about as much as doctors like when they get asked about Greg House, MD. I asked her, so what do you think of Judge Judy? The face that she made is pretty similar to the face that I make when people tell me to eat my vegetables. She said, I can't remember exactly how she put it, but somewhere in her response, the phrase, she's an embarrassment to the legal profession. And I remember in those days, I was young, I was naive, and I knew even less than I know now, which still isn't a lot. And that came as a surprise to me, though, because up until that point, the only reference that I really had for the justice system was traffic court. And I had quite a bit of experience in traffic court. But that was it. And for all I knew, what I saw when I tuned into Judge Judy was what judges did, what judges behaved like. And that federal judge taught me differently, and I've never forgotten that. So ever since then, I've kind of wondered, what's real and what's not. So for anyone who's wondering, that's where this comes from. And there's also a secondary message in there about TV rotting your brain, but yeah, considering our chosen medium. So I thought we might start tonight with a story that is truly stranger than fiction. So we've all heard that truth can be stranger than fiction, but nobody knew how strange until we heard the story of the worst judge ever, and it comes to us care of a lemon law attorney from Michigan. Hopefully, at least some of you in the viewing audience are familiar with Steve Leto. Steve has another YouTube channel, and on that channel, his program, Leto's Law, shares Steve's unique perspective and insights into legal situations of the day. Now, Steve wanted to be here with us tonight, but schedule conflicts prevented it. But since he couldn't be here to share his story in person, he gave me his permission to share an excerpt of one of his videos which describes the behavior of this judge. For those who are wondering who the worst judge in the world is, her name is Judge Teresa Brennan, and she was once a district court judge in the 53rd District Court in Livingston County, Michigan. She was appointed to that position in 2005 by Governor Jennifer Granholm, and we're only going to describe her behavior And at the end of the show, we'll tell you what eventually happened to her. So make sure you stay tuned to the very end.
Hello. Welcome once again to Leto's Law. I'm Steve Leto. Today I'm going to talk to you about the worst judge I've ever been in front of. The worst judge ever, in my experience. I'm an attorney in Michigan. I've been practicing law now here for 27 years. I've appeared in courts all over the great state of Michigan, state district courts, state circuit courts, and of course, federal courts. And along the line, I've encountered many judges, and some I've had issues with. You know, they ruled against me, or I didn't like their attitudes, or whatever. And I've had some good judges I liked. I've had some judges I befriended, judges I'd actually swing by and say hello to, even if I wasn't in front of them on a particular day, but simply because I was in their court and I liked them. But the one judge that I've actually made a point of avoiding is the one I'm going to tell you about today. A judge named Teresa Brennan in Brighton, Michigan. If you don't believe me, Google her. You'll quickly find what I'm talking about. And here's what happened a couple of years ago. A couple of friends of mine mentioned to me that they had problems in a court in Brighton, Michigan. And Brighton is a town, I guess about 45 minutes, maybe an hour northwest of Detroit. It's a neat little town. And a couple different friends of mine mentioned, they said, yeah, have you had any cases in Brighton lately? And I said, no, why? And they said, well, there's a judge there who's just out of control. And I said, okay, what's the story? And they said, well, this is a woman judge, and she will just berate you. And she beats people up, verbally, and she treats everyone with the most utter contempt that you'll be sorry you set foot in her courtroom. And I said, why? And they go, don't know. She's out of control. And so somewhere along the line, I had someone contact me, and they needed my help in Brighton. And contrary to the advice I'd gotten from my friends who said, don't file cases in Brighton if you can avoid it, I filed a case in Brighton, and it got assigned to Judge Teresa Brennan. And I went to a pretrial conference, which is normally where you just stand up in front of the judge and both sides are there. And the judge normally would say, what's the case about? How long do you guys need? When would you like me to set it for trial? And is there any way I can help you possibly resolve the case? And so I go to court for the pretrial conference. My opposing counsel's there. And I got the opportunity to watch a few people who went before me, a few cases that went before me. And she's beating everybody up. And it's so hard to describe to people who aren't in court very often. But there's a certain decorum in the courtroom and a certain amount of respect. You show the bench respect. You treat judges with respect, but you also expect that the judges will treat you fairly and possibly with some respect as well. And I got up there and I introduced myself and my client, and opposing counsel does the same thing. And the judge starts yelling at us. And she asks me to pull the complaint out, the lawsuit out, and she starts going through it line by line. Okay. Paragraph 3, what does that mean? Paragraph 4, how are you going to prove that? Paragraph 5, what does that mean? Paragraph 6, how are you going to prove paragraph 6? And there's a process in civil litigation where an opponent can look at a complaint and say, I don't think this complaint is proper. And they can bring what's called a motion for summary judgment or a summary disposition, it's called in Michigan, asking the court to rule on whether or not the complaint is sufficient to go to trial. And about halfway through the questioning by the judge, I said, Your Honor, I wasn't expecting to be arguing a motion for summary judgment this morning. And she cut me off and she's like, no, that's not why we're here, but I have the right to ask these questions. Of course, she's got the right to ask the questions, but that's still a little bit odd. And so she'd fire questions at me and say, I don't know if I'm going to let you do this. And it got to be so weird. I'm like, this is crazy. But then ironically, she does the exact same thing to opposing counsel. She starts ripping apart that guy's answer. Okay, you said this. What does that mean? Well, you said this. What does that mean? And it's such an unpleasant experience that I've spoken to people and I said, does she do this in the hopes that you'll be so sick of dealing with her that maybe you'll settle your case and go away? And if the case settles, that's a good thing, right? Maybe that's what she's trying to do. But I heard so many stories about crazy things she did that I thought, okay, this is not a plan on her part. This is just the fact that she does not have the proper temperament to be a judge. And in case you think I'm just being a little bit over dramatic here, I'm not. I'm underplaying how bad it was. And I had to go in front of her more than once. And I saw her beating other people up. She beat me up. I'm talking about verbally from the bench. The most disrespected I've ever been in a courtroom. And I've had people who didn't respect me. And she put them all to shame. Okay, so just so you think I'm not making this stuff.
And the rest of the video describes some coverage that case was receiving in the mainstream media, and boy, what a case it was.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think of that, Artie? Does that sound like a judge you'd ever want to meet?
Well, obviously not. There's supposed to be an expectation of mutual respect. I mean, we're all professionals, both counsel and the judge, and that's part of the canon. It's part of the RPC, is that we're supposed to be treating each other with mutual respect and respect for the profession. So to have a judge to go straight to 100 from their initial appearance in the case is pretty. Yeah, as he said, it's not like it's illegal or or like it's inherently improper for the judge to ask questions, but it's also very unorthodox, especially with the apparent tone that she gives to both counsel.
And that, when I actually saw a later update that Steve provided on that situation before I saw this. And even the corrective steps that he was describing, if I'm not spoiling too much, were surprising to me. It's like, I can't imagine a judge having that happen to them in an official capacity. It was so, but having heard what we just heard, and I only watched that video all the way through after I'd already heard the later chapters of the story. It's like trying to watch Iron Man after you've already watched Endgame. You already know where the story is going, so the first time you see Tony Stark, you know he's a dead man. But just watching that story unfold and putting everything in chronological order, I was shocked. So, and it didn't square with any of the traffic court judges I'd ever met. They were always, I don't want to say curt, but they were always efficient, I guess is the best way to put it. They had however many cases to get through in a day, so they're not wasting time on each one, but nothing that I saw crossed the bounds of professionalism or anything else. So, I don't know. But yeah, that story just makes me kind of shake my head sadly that any judge like that could get onto the bench and then stay on it for as long as that judge apparently did.
Mm-hmm.
So, before we dive into some of the other content that we've got, I want to talk just a little bit more about your channel. So, in our last episode, we had Kfar with us, and he too did the debunking of frauditors and sovsits thing, and we went through kind of a quick primer on what those people are and what they do. But I wonder if you might give us a little bit more background on some of the things that you do that maybe set your channel apart.
Well, largely, a lot of the time, I try to focus on more of the backstory, a lot of the background in a lot of these situations. So, for example, I like to focus breakdowns on actual court hearings, less more reaction, but more trying to get to the backstory of the individual involved, what sort of, and whether you can tell whether what guru they're referring to, because a lot of these situations, you can tell where they got their information by the script that they're reading off of, by the questions they're asking the judge, by the way they format their filings. And in that respect, I like to go into a little bit deeper onto the gurus themselves, what they believe, what sets them apart from other gurus, and also regarding the reactions to traffic situations, but also courtroom situations. I kind of like to go into a specificity with regard to what they sometimes cite, because oftentimes they like to cite the UCC, they like to cite certain court cases, and they like to cite certain portions of the state statutes. And oftentimes what I like to do is, in addition to having a piece of the video or the audio being displayed, I also have the relevant case citation and the relevant statutes also up on display for the audience, so I can tell them this is what the court actually said in this case. This is what the statute actually says, and why they're wrong, and why they're using these cases inappropriately. So my channel, I really like to go into the deep dives, the backstory and the history of this movement, and the history of certain gurus that are infamous, as well as kind of go into a more I don't want to say intellectual, because oftentimes I still shoot the shit, I still make fun, I still laugh, and I'll still have a good time, but I still want to have at least a little bit more detail, more so than just my barefaced reaction.
And that's one of the reasons that I like your channel. I'm remembering how I responded to these words in 1996, so this shows how I've actually grown up in the last 16 years, but I like your channel because it's educational and informational, and you make me think about, I mean, a lot of the channels that cover soft-sits and frauditors rightly poke fun at these people's behavior, and I like the fact that when I tune into your channel, I'm going to get a factual basis for why what they're doing fails the common sense test.
Like, yeah, I think one of my favorite ones that I did was really the Kim Blandino saga, that I did late last year, in December. I think I was fairly unique in that I went beyond the videos that the other channel, Our Nevada Judges, has highlighted, but I wanted to go back into his actual history and find out a lot of his old cases, and really get to the heart of why this guy is who he is. And I think that's what a lot of my viewers like to see, and I think that's what that's what they come to my channel for.
And since you mentioned Our Nevada Judges, I want to give them a special shout out. We mentioned that on our previous episode with KFAR, but I want to reiterate, that is an excellent channel for content related to the judicial system. So if you're not subscribed to that channel already, go give them a subscription. And while you're at it, make sure you subscribe to Artie's channel as well. That's Artie's Corporate Fiction. There will be a link in the description box. Go subscribe. Tell him B Squared sent you. Artie would appreciate it, and so would I. So I'd seen something about Kim Blandino recently. I think it might have been Kick that did it, but I actually don't know anything about that situation. Can you give us a quick Cliff's Notes primer on what that is?
About Kim Blandino himself and the whole case surrounding it?
Yeah.
I'll try. I did a 5-part series. But the long story short, Kim Blandino is a vexatious. He's not a sovereign citizen, and I've said that before, and a lot of other people said it. He is not a sovereign citizen. He's a vexatious litigant, and there is a difference between the two. Yes, they both abuse the legal process, but it's completely different in how they operate. Kim Blandino is a well-known, at least in Clark County, Nevada, aka Las Vegas. He's a well-known vexatious litigant who files a myriad of lawsuits, a lot of it stemming from his family court case. But the reason why he was in trouble this year, and why the trial happened and everything like that, was because one of his tropes is to file certain actions against judges in Clark County. And apparently he went too far, where he was charged with impersonating a public official and extortion against a particular judge who presided over a traffic case. He had delayed and frustrated the court process for the better part of a year, if not nearly 2 years, through a lot of his frivolous filings, a lot of his motions, in trying to get this case removed from the entirety of Clark County, or the 8th Judicial District, which encompasses Clark County, into another district entirely. He didn't get that. There was a trial. He was found guilty. But throughout the entirety of the process, Blandino expressed a personality that he just would not listen to anybody. He would not listen to the judge's orders or the or the advice of his own counsel, which he often tried to represent himself, but then he lost that privilege because he kept on frustrating the court process. Ultimately, he was found guilty, and I believe it was in the beginning of March was his trial. I believe that was the case. He was found guilty, and he is awaiting sentencing in July. But since then, he has tried filing various appeals, and I believe they haven't really come to fruition. In the midst of all this, he's also trying to actually sue the judge that he victimized, but that hasn't gone anywhere either. So as far as I understand, his sentencing is I believe July 2nd or something like that, or July 5th.
And it's not often you hear courts say you cannot file any pro se actions and represent yourself. I've only ever heard of one other case where that step was taken. If memory serves, the guy's name was Jonathan Lee Riches. Have you ever heard that name?
Mm-mm.
It's been a while since I looked at that case, but he was a guy that was in prison either on a charge of or on a conviction of wire fraud, among other things. But he filed lawsuits in like every jurisdiction there is in this great nation of ours, from prison, and they were just out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these things were just out there. Matter of fact, let me pull up the Google, and we can take a look at some of his background. And but as soon as you said vexatious litigant, it reminded me of some things that this guy has done. So this is his Wikipedia entry, and I know everyone out there is moaning and groaning because Wikipedia is not a reliable source. We know this, but this program is educational and informational second and is entertainmental first. So I guarantee you this has entertainmental value. But look at this. Since January of 2006, look at how many lawsuits he has filed. Among the more famous defendants are New England Patriots coach Bill Belichick, former President George Bush, former AG Janet Reno, Martha Stewart. He was suing the INS at one point to prevent him from being deported to Pakistan. I mean, this guy, he tried to intervene in other cases that were ongoing at the time, and on and on and on. And all I can say is what he did was actually clever, because I remember following this during this string of lawsuits. What he did was, to avoid being termed a vexatious litigant, he was actually filing in a different jurisdiction every time. Because how they get you is if you do it more than once in the same jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
And just looking at this, seeing some of the things that he said, some of the allegations, the amount of damages that he was claimed, as soon as I saw that he had filed to prevent himself being deported to Pakistan, I'm like, at what point was that even a possibility?
Yeah.
So
maybe I have heard of him, but I couldn't recall. But I mean, I've seen other people accused of being a vexatious litigants, and you're right. And the problem with a lot of that is that if you're deemed a vexatious litigants, it's only for that specific district court. It's not for like the entirety of the federal judiciary. So that's that was a smart way of being able to avoid being classified as such.
Yeah, and that's at the time. While this was going on, I remember there was a raucous debate going on as to whether he was just that loony and that out there, or if he was doing it as a means to keep himself entertained until he was released. And I don't know. My conclusion to that was maybe 6 of one, maybe half a dozen of the other, and together he's still one taco short of a combination plate. But I don't know. When you see it from others, I mean, what's your take?
I get it. I think it depends on the filing, because sovereign citizens get classified as vexatious litigants all the time as well, and I think that's definitely more driven by their ideology than anything else, and not driven by attention. Could also be mental health, but it's definitely more ideologically driven than anything else.
Yeah,
that causes them to file suit.
Yeah, and so many cases come to mind about sovcits do things driven by their ideology, and I'm talking about more than just, oh, I'm not driving, I'm traveling. I'm talking about like the big stuff, like that guy that I want to say he was charged with kidnapping, and I can't remember the guy's name. I want to say it was David something, but he and his crew showed up at that courthouse. It's the guy with the long
Bear
hair.
Stearns.
Yes.
Bear's Law and Forensic Science or something like that. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his name either, but I know exactly who you're referring to. He always has he lists off all the things that he says, and he claims that he puts like 25 prosecutors and judges in prison, yada yada yada. And yeah, he got hooked up for kidnapping and unauthorized practice of law. So
yeah, and I see stuff like that, and it's just always struck me as these people are doing what they're doing because they're motivated by an ideology that, as far as I know, has never yielded dividends for any practitioners thereof. And I just don't get it. The preponderance of evidence suggests that what you're doing will not bear fruit and will come at cost. So why do you do it? At what point do they have to admit, I'm disconnected from reality? I shouldn't say it that way, but you know what I'm getting at.
Well, you know what? In a weird sense, I almost have a little bit of respect for Mr. Bear's Law, because they actually walk the walk. They'll actually go to the courthouse and they'll actually file this stuff. Most of the time, in many of these gurus, they only teach. They don't actually stick their necks out there. So in that sense, I'll give him a smidgen more respect than the usual guru, because he'll actually try to put his money where his mouth is. But beyond that, obviously, he's still a jackass.
And that's being polite.
Yeah.
So mentioning broken system, broken trust, I have to bring up what we described on KFAR's episode as the hearing heard round the world, where he goes into court and he claims that, well, I consulted with an attorney, and the prosecutor says, no, he was on this YouTube channel with Artie's Corporate Fiction, and Artie says, no, I did not give him legal advice at any time. I mean,
you're mixing up two different hearings. There was one hearing that he did where he mentioned my channel to the judge, and he's like, well, I talked with Artie's Corporate Fiction, and he told me this, that, and the other thing, and I can't remember the rest of it. But that was when he actually mentioned, and actually that resulted in me having the one-to-one conversation, because we overheard that. We overheard that hearing, and then in the next hearing, that is when the prosecutor apparently found that interview that I did with him, and that's when she mentioned me by name as well. He in BSBT's defense, he never said that he consulted with me in my capacity as an attorney. He didn't say that, so I can't say that he tried to pull that on me, but he did. And as a matter of fact, in that interview, in that hearing where the prosecutor mentioned my discussion with him, he didn't really even say much. It was the prosecutor who was talking about what he said, what he alleged, and then the judge talking to him, and he really was like, well, I mean, shouldn't you put the prosecutor under oath if she's going to testify? I'm like, no, she's not testifying to anything, number one. Number two, yeah, the judge already corrected you, saying that you might have to be sworn under oath to testify because of what you allegedly said in this interview, and which BSBT remarked, I think in the chat when I was doing the reaction to that, saying, actually, yeah, dude, in that sense, you could actually plead the fifth in that, because you might be incriminating yourself. if you were to testify to what you said in that interview. So so that was what happened, and I still kind of like it, not to stroke my own ego, but I was not expecting my channel name to ever be, read aloud in open court for anything. I mean, honestly, if I ever thought that somebody was going to do that, I'd be in a nightmare scenario, because I feel like that would be involving something negative about me. You know what I mean? That might get me in trouble, but who knew that my channel names would be heard in open court in Michigan and not here in New Jersey?
Yeah, and so my fault. I was conflating two events. So thanks for setting me straight. You see how people in polite society accept that they are mistaken? See, I didn't pull a delete laws and swell up and tell Artie how awful he was for telling me I was wrong. See how easy it is? Why can't the rest of society do that? I don't get it. So no.
Well, I think when you deal with, in my experience dealing with sovereign citizens and auditors, a lot of them do not have a sense of, I guess the best way of saying humility, or they my pride isn't so large that I will hand wave reject any sort of potential correction that a non-lawyer may give to me on a law that I may be wrong on. I'm not so prideful that I will not accept it and take my lumps and correct myself if it happens to be that way. As a matter of fact, I did that with BSPT, I think, in the aftermath, and the man's been running with it forever. I think it was ultimately a relatively minor correction. Oh yeah, it was this whole thing with shall and must. But even then, I still called him out on it on a certain stuff. It still didn't really help him out, because Michigan's vehicle code still explicitly defined shall as a mandatory or as a requirement and not as voluntary, which was his central argument in the first place. Was yes, in certain circumstances the court has interpreted shall to not mean requirements or in that regard. It's like, yes, you're right, I concede that the court has actually said that, but I also see that in the relative context, which is talking about Michigan's vehicle code, it explicitly says that shall is a requirement, shall is mandatory. So your argument doesn't even work at all, because so why are we even here? You know what I mean? So congratulations, your point still doesn't work. But that's like, but I'm willing to accept it. I'm willing to go back and correct myself and move forward. A lot of these guys, they don't. Because again, a lot of it is ideologically driven, and it's very hard to be corrected when you're given information that contradicts your prevailing ideology. Right.
And I think humility is a good word for it. Humility and integrity kind of go hand in hand. But yeah, certainly. And yeah, it's nice to be down to earth, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you're talking about the thing with the Michigan vehicle code. Are you referring to the now famous incident where he got pulled over by the officer that knew his name and wound up towing the car that was not his because of that thing with his license? He claimed that he had this letter from the court that said, "You can drive," when in fact it said, "You can drive, ... if you do this, this," and it's like poster 7 almost. He read the part that he thought burnished his position without reading like the majority of the document that didn't.
Yeah. I actually haven't even seen that video from start to finish. I know the video you're referring to, but again, it's how can you not? Again, I don't want to keep on stuttering because it's hard. Because most us, and by us I mean like the average citizen, understands what words mean, and that we're supposed to read the entirety of a document to coalesce the context and apply meaning to it. But these guys operate in a world where they will selectively grab whatever sentence they feel that supports the position, whether it be in a letter or in a court case, and they'll run with it, no matter what the other prevailing context applies, they'll take it and run with it and then still be shocked when they're confronted with the reality.
And I've got to ask, because it seems like one dimension of some of those situations, at least that I'm aware of. So I've got to ask this. How often do you have to deal with situations where, when there's a list of things, like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then at the end, there's that last item, so you have 4, or 5. How often do you deal with people who misinterpret stuff like that by trying to pretend that last comma isn't there? I want to say it's the Oxford comma.
You're talking about the Oxford comma, yes.
How often do you deal with situations where simple misunderstanding of the Oxford comma would have cleared things up?
Well, I mean, I feel like I've seen people debate that a lot, especially in legal circles. So it's definitely a thing that happens. And I personally am a very big fan of the Oxford comma, in respect that it helps aid in context, and I feel the absence of the Oxford comma will just create in more ambiguity, and that's the last thing the legal profession needs. Yeah,
and I asked that because that's I have a degree in broadcasting, and when they were teaching us how to write, how to deal with lists of items is something that we spent quite a bit of time on. And from the bits that I've seen on your channel, on Steve Leto's channel, go subscribe if you haven't, and some other channels that look at things from a legal standpoint, I've seen that same principle in the legal dimension. So I know that I've seen it in broadcasting context a lot, and that's why I was curious if you had seen a lot of it in the work that you do. So if you think back to what I described a little bit ago from my conversation with that federal judge, at one point I had no real barometer for how judges behave other than what I saw on TV. But what I wasn't thinking about at the time was certain things they do on TV might be influenced by real-world experiences, and some of it might be driven by ratings, or seeking ratings, I should say. And I never knew the difference. Of course, I know the difference now, but the funny thing about a lot of jurists that you'll see on TV is that they are, in fact, actual retired judges from family court systems, from juvenile court systems, the list goes on. So even knowing that what they're doing might be a rating stunt, you always have to think in the back of your mind, well, maybe not. So we've got a couple of examples of judges as seen on TV that I wanted to take a look at and try to dissect if what they're doing falls within the realm of how a proper judge should act versus things you would just see on TV and that you would hopefully never see in a real courtroom. Mm-hmm. Our first example is Judge Glenda Hatchett, who people of my age group may know from her court show, which ran from 2000 to 2008. What you may not know is that prior to Judge Hatchett, the series, she was actually, for a time, the chief presiding judge for the Fulton County, Georgia Juvenile Court, and before that, she worked for Delta Airlines as the senior attorney and the public relations manager. And she actually left in 2000 to do Judge Hatchett. And I had never known that. So what we have is a case from her more modern show, The Verdict with Judge Hatchett, which is essentially a spiritual successor to her original show. But we have a case here where her reactions as an individual, as a member of the public, I understand her reaction. But Artie, let's watch this and see if this strikes you as judge-like behavior. So let's judge the judge.
Court is now in session with the Honorable Judge Hatchett presiding. Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Good day. You may be seated. we have a situation here today, don't we? Ms. Smiley, this is all so unfortunate. I understand that you have been giving money, that over the years you've given more than $150,000 to the educational foundation that Mr. Holtz runs.
Sorry, myself and my family, Your Honor.
You and your family have been very, very generous. You were in court today because there was a specific gift, most recently of $15,000, that you had some special conditions on that gift. Tell me about it, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you for the opportunity to get my $15,000 donation returned.
And so I guess before we get too far into the actual case, I think it might actually be a good idea to explain to our viewing audience the difference between how court cases, as you see them on TV, come to your screen versus how actual litigation makes it to court. So Artie, if you don't mind, I'll explain my understanding of how these cases come to be, and then if you can walk us through the process of getting an actual case into court after that.
Okay.
So when you see people in a television courtroom, what's happened is most of them filed an actual case, usually in small claims court, which producers of these various courtroom shows go through. They'll contact the litigants involved and say, hey, why don't you come fight this out on our show? And if you do, we'll do this, this, and this, this, and this. And usually it'll be something along the lines of any judgments are paid from a fund maintained by the producer. Meanwhile, the litigants get a all expense paid vacation to Los Angeles or New York or wherever the show tapes. And what that means is these people may or may not have had any assistance preparing their cases. And the reason I bring that up is you hear people going through like the facts of their case, cogently aware that they're on television, versus when you're in an actual courtroom, you're not worrying about the 10 million people that are watching you. You're only worried about what the judge has to say. Mm-hmm. And that was a point that Kafar and I discussed briefly on his episode in light of what our Nevada judges had said. You see some courts allow recording and some don't. Mm-hmm. And as far as I'm concerned, there's a very valid reason for that. Some people are less comfortable being exposed to a public venue, whether it's news or YouTube or whatever, than others. So initially, I think that's what led to the popularity of some of these court shows. But at any rate, what you're seeing when you're watching a televised court case like this one is, as I mentioned, Judge Hatchett here is a retired practicing judge. However, when you're watching one of these cases, she's not actually acting in the capacity of a judge. What she's doing is these judges are acting as arbitrators, and they're determining by usually the same burden of proof as you'd have in small claims court. Is there more evidence than not as to one side or the other? And the litigants will have usually signed a contract agreeing that they will abide by whatever decision the arbitrator makes. However, in doing so, there's usually a clause that says this decision cannot be appealed through an actual legal venue. And I think that's a good approach to it. However, as you see, in these types of cases, there are no attorneys present, and the litigants are basically fending for themselves. So that's how it works in the world of the television courtroom. Artie, contrast that with how it works in the actual legal world, if you would, please.
Well, in most instances, the cases are usually filed by the litigants. Okay, I guess let's assume for the sake of argument that both parties are going to be operating pro se. So you would have the plaintiff, she files her complaint, pays the appropriate fee, and in most instances, they'll probably have a pretrial conference. However, in small claims, I'm not sure if that, it depends on the jurisdiction that you're in, whether or not there would be a significant pretrial conference ahead of time. But if, because again, it depends on what jurisdiction as to how much is small claims. You know, it could be different between California or New Jersey or Ohio. So that's usually what happens in a pretrial conference. And so what would ultimately happen is a lot of it does involve presenting evidence. And I think that's probably the biggest difference between what goes on in these courtrooms versus what goes on in courtrooms in these judge shows versus what goes on in an actual small claims, because most of the time the evidence usually has to have some level of foundation. I can't just pull generally can't usually pull a receipt out of my back pocket saying, hey, here's the bill. I usually have to be asked a couple of questions by the judge to lay the foundations for its authenticity, and that usually involves testifying under oath. So, and also that involves being able for the opposing party to have the opportunity to see it as well. And in many aspects of that's what happens in pretrial conferences, is that evidence you're presenting to the judge what evidence you expect to present at trial, and so the trial itself becomes far more efficient. Whereas neither party is going to be blindsided by the other by presenting a piece of evidence that they weren't prepared to counter or prepared to address. So I think that's probably the biggest difference between what happens in arbitration. Arbitration, the rules of evidence is far more lax. It could also be the case in small claims and jurisdictions. I don't have any trial experience personally, because that's not what my field is. But I fully expected that to be the case in arbitration, not so much in an actual court case. So laying the foundation, and there's a lot more evidentiary rules that are in place prior to getting it. And again, I assume that these folks, these parties, are seeing the judge for the first time. That's usually, again, it may be that may be the case in a small claims court, but generally in regular civil suits, that would almost never happen. You would never have an immediate trial upon first appearance with a judge. You'd have at least one, if not two, pretrial conferences, depending on the complexity of the case, prior to the actual trial itself.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the rules that surround discovery in an actual legal proceeding require all evidence, including a witness list, to be disclosed to the opposing counsel. Is that right?
Correct. And that's usually established in a pretrial conference. That's usually what happens there. The judge will set a deadline for discovery, and set a second pretrial conference for the parties to meet up. Make sure that discovery was adhered to, and also to hear any potential motions that the opposing counsel may have, or the parties may have to address prior to the trial itself. Again, this idea that it sounds like Judge Hatchett may have been able to review the complaint beforehand, but a trial is never going to happen with the parties seeing the judge for the very first time in person.
Right. And the reason that I brought up that aspect specifically was a staple of a lot of these televised court shows is surprise witnesses. Like they'll come, the one side will tell their story, the defendant will respond, and then the plaintiff will say, well, I have this surprise witness waiting in the green room, and the bailiff brings them in, and it turns into a gotcha moment. And while it does make for great television, my understanding is that's not how an actual court proceeding would work, nor should it, in my opinion.
Like we might be going into a Judge Judy clip, but one particular Judge Judy clip that I recall, was where she, and again, this actually may happen in certain jurisdictions, in certain jurisdictions where, in small claims court, it's we might get a little bit too deep in the weeds, but I'll try to be brief. Where Judge Judy herself, I mean, again, this could be fucking theater, this could be a play up for the thing, but she actually contacted a tow truck company or something like that to confirm a bill or a bill of sale or something like that, and she physically called. Now, That is never going to happen in most primary civil suits. Again, the rules may be different in small claims court, but that's totally goes against the concept of the adversarial system that we have. And what I mean by that is that the American British common law system is adversarial, meaning it's the two sides are against each other. They're going head to head. They're the ones who are in charge of determining the facts and of compiling the facts to present in the case. And the judge is supposed to be the neutral referee, the neutral third party. And I forget what they're called in the civil part, but in the civil part, the judges actually act in an investigatory body. So you may see judges actually find out facts for themselves in the same sense that I saw Judge Judy do, where she called the tow truck company. So that's definitely another differentiating aspect of the judge actively investigating the facts of the case rather than being hands off and relying on the parties to make their own cases for them.
Right. And over the years, I saw Judge Judy place a number of on-air phone calls, exactly as you just described, to third parties that were involved in one side or the other of what was going on. And I always looked at that. Part of me was glad that she did that because, yeah, it never hurts to verify what you're hearing from someone who isn't in court. But at the same time, part of me always wondered if she was calling people that had been coached to talk to her. Like if Judge Judy calls you, here's what you're supposed to say. And I remember one case specifically where she made a call like that, and whoever she spoke to, she came back out and said, I talked to this person who you told to expect a call from me. And I don't know, it just always made me kind of question that. And in a way, I'm glad that that's not accurate to what a real judge would do most of the time. And as far as you actually brought up an aspect of these televised proceedings that I missed, which was the information that the judge actually gets. So what happens is once litigants agree to bring their case onto the program, what happens is the producers will write usually just a half-page summary of the facts of the case, who's involved, and the 5 W's, and that's what the judge gets. It's enough for them to ask starter questions, but from there, they go through and basically do, I don't know if you'd call this a cross-examination, but they go through and they do the questioning more or less on the fly from there. Whereas, like you said, in a real case, the judge would have all the evidence presented to them in real time.
Well, because, again, this is arbitration. And in arbitration, it's definitely the judge or the arbitrator has far more leeway to try and ask questions and kind of get to the bottom of what's going on. So, kind of like mediation, but in mediation is a different animal. But in arbitration, that's kind of the goal of the arbitrator, is to try and ask questions of the parties to try and figure out, what the circumstances are, more so than a judge would in a regular courtroom environment.
Right. And if they're on TV, it doesn't hurt to help them get ratings. So now that we've kind of established the differences in how these things wind their way through, let's get back to this case from Judge Hatchett.
To me from Mr. Holtz's organization, Bright Smart Futures. I've been extremely fortunate in my life, and I hold education to be the key to every success that I've had. I find it extremely important for young people to get an education.
And one thing that I do think kind of bears mentioning is going back to courtroom decorum and etiquette. I know that in a real court proceeding, everyone is, most of the time that I'm aware of, advised to keep the histrionics to a minimum, say what you have to say, but keep the histrionics to a minimum. And that's something that they have more leeway with when they're on television like this. So that bears mentioning as well, I think.
underserved areas to go on to obtain education in four-year or colleges or universities.
All right, hold it right there. Let me understand about your organization. Tell me about the mission of your organization, Mr. Holtz.
The mission of our organization is to support students that need scholarships. The nonprofit takes in money from donors like Ms. Smiley, and we designate it as we see fit. We've been in business for over 20 years. I've been the director for over 10 years.
All right.
I also have a pre-existing relationship with Ms. Smiley's family.
How so?
Well, they've been donating for 5+ years. And
it's my understanding from the paperwork filed with the court that they have contributed some $150,000 at least to the program.
Correct.
All right.
And they've donated and never asked me how the funds were going to be allocated.
All right.
Your Honor, but that was a different situation. This particular donation was in correspondence with a specific fundraising solicitation.
All right.
It was to be for the use of creating a scholarship in the name of my family for an Atlanta-based student to go to an Atlanta four-year college or university.
Let me say this. My parents did not have a lot of money, but my family was wealthy in ways that you can't measure. But what my parents did is that they put a premium on education. And my education changed the direction of my life. And so I get it. Now, Mr. Holtz, in all fairness, was there a special fundraising drive that was going on when Ms. Smiley made the $15,000 contribution? Yes or no?
No.
There was not?
No, it was not specific towards one student.
I didn't ask you that. I said, was there a special fundraiser going on at the time that she made the $15,000 contribution? Yes or no?
So what do you think so far? She's being level-headed and she's being assertive, but she's being calm, I think. So far, I think she's doing what a judge should do. What do you think?
Right. I think she's fine. I think I think everybody is. For me, I'm like, get to the point, please. But I mean, as you already mentioned, that they have more leeway to pontificate about their backstory and everything like that. But so far, I got no issues.
No.
No, there was no special fundraising drive. Just out of the clear blue, she calls you up and says, I'm going to write a check for $15,000.
Absolutely, because fundraising for us is an ongoing process. We're always fundraising.
Coming up on...
You said there have never been any stipulations on her gift. She says this particular gift, though, she talked to you about it being named after her family and that she wanted a couple of criteria. She wanted the $15,000 to go to support a student in Atlanta who was going to an Atlanta area university or college. Now you're under oath. Did you never have that discussion with Ms. Smiley?
She expressed her wishes.
And what were her wishes?
Her wishes were that one student received the $15,000. I listened to her, and at the time, we had 4 students that needed this allocation. So the question is, either allocate the money towards the 4 students, and this is a question of need. They need the money now, and the nonprofit is ready to allocate or designate the funds.
Did you go back to Ms. Smiley and say, you know what? You designated this $15,000, which is what you've said, that she wanted it to go to a student who was going to college in the Atlanta area. Explain to me what happened to the $15,000.
The $15,000 was allocated towards 4 students, and again, this is based on needs.
4 students, so that the 4 students go to an Atlanta area university, college, or university?
So now you're starting to see Judge Hatchett's body language change. Before, she was relaxed, she was sitting back, and she was kind of taking it all in. But look at her body language here. She's got her arms crossed, her eyebrows are up. You can tell that she's getting irritated already. So my question is, this doesn't say to me that the that the defendant is going to lose. I don't get that from just what I see, but she's clearly not pleased with what she's hearing. So, what do you think of that?
I mean, judges aren't zombies, so of course the judge is going to express themselves when they don't think that they're getting given a straight answer from whether it be the party or the or counsel. But I don't have a personal issue with a judge, expressing themselves. It's it always depends on the matter of degree, Right. So her giving away the idea that she's not buying what the defendant is selling is, it happens.
Yeah, it does. And that's an important point that you just made too, which is ultimately judges are people, and that goes for as much for people in real life as it is on television. People are going to feel how they're going to feel. Some people hide it better than others. One of the real life judges that we're going to take a look at farther in, I think is great at hiding the emotional dimension of what's happening around him. But then again, another TV judge who shall remain nameless is, let's just say, fairly open with how they feel. And we'll see that in just a little bit. But valid point, Artie, for sure. So let's skip farther in to when we're closer to the end of the case, and we can start to see how things have progressed.
A family that's already given $150,000. Then you get another $15,000, and they plan to give the program, the nonprofit, to send other young people to school $250,000. So let me just say something positive to you. I appreciate the fact that you are supporting young people. But that $15,000 was not intended to help someone go to vocational school for plumbing and fashion design and the other two categories you told me.
All these categories fall within the definition of higher education.
No, they do not. When a layperson says, I am making a contribution for higher education, the reasonable conclusion and assumption is that it's going to be college and university. You're going to pay every dime of this $15,000 back because you don't get it. And your board is foolish to let you continue to be CEO.
I was perfectly within my rights with my actions.
Well, you're going to be perfectly in your rights with your action to give back the $15,000 because
That's
in
your
writing.
opinion.
Oh, my opinion is the only one that matters in this courtroom. Mr. Holston, if you say one more word, I'm holding you in contempt of court. You hear me? Say one more word. I dare you to say one more word in here. You are obnoxious. You should be fired as a CEO. Your board is ridiculous to have you because you have burned critical bridges, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars that could be used for students who need it. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $15,000. And get out of my courtroom. Get him out of here. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, so talk about a fiery finish. What do you think of that?
I question whether she's actually legally able to be held somebody in contempt of court. Maybe it might be possible that I question that. I didn't really mind if she's going to raise her voice. If a party's turns out to be an asshole, then I don't have an issue with a judge, on occasion laying it into somebody. But like you saying you're obnoxious, you should be fired. The board was a mistake. I feel like you're going a bit far in that because now you're going beyond their actions and you're going far beyond. You're going into personal attacks, and that's no matter how awful a plaintiff may be, you have to do your best to refrain from that. Again, I don't have an issue with a judge laying into somebody, but you can lay into somebody yet still sound professional. And I've heard that before, and I've seen examples of that before. You know what I mean? So her that sort of like grandstanding is a bit much, in my opinion.
And that's Judge Hatchett for you. And she actually, in this series, she actually tones that down. But in her previous series from the 2000s, this kind of thing was a lot more common. And it was because in the previous series, she dealt a lot more with juvenile defendants and those types of cases. So I get it.
Well, I mean, I can get it in that respect too, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, another TV judge that you see that kind of behavior from a lot more is probably the one everyone thought we were going to start with, and that is Judge Judy Scheindlin, who we all know from a quarter century of her eponymous court show on NBC. What you may not know is that before that, she actually took several trips through several aspects of the court system. She was appointed a criminal court judge by New York Mayor Ed Koch in 1982 and was then promoted to supervising judge in the Manhattan Family Court System in 1986. So, and from then until 1996, that's what she did. And then, of course, as we all know, in 96, Judge Judy, the series started, and we had 25 years of entertainment thanks to her. So I'll sum up this case. We won't watch the whole thing, but this case is a situation whereby the plaintiff basically had her identity stolen by her cousin, the defendant, on the occasion of the defendant's 21st birthday. So she drank and then drove, and when she inevitably got pulled over, she gave the police officer her cousin's ID. Yeah. And,
wow.
And this
best cousin
indeed.
Man.
And this case details how that unfolded. And I'll just let the case speak for itself. We won't watch the whole thing. I'll skip through it, but there's a couple of moments here that I think, matter of fact, I'm going to skip to, well, let me let them describe the case, and then we'll go to the good part.
I've been sworn in, Judge. You may be seated. Ma'am, have a seat.
You're going to find this really interesting, Bird. Guaranteed. You see, Miss Johnson over here got stopped by the police for a traffic infraction. The first time you were stopped, what kind of violation was it, Miss Johnson?
Speeding.
Speeding? And how fast were you going?
I think I was going like 60, I think. 50.
Could you keep your voice up, please?
Like 60 or about 55.
And when she got stopped for speeding, according to the complaint, which is, you know, not disputed by the defendant, she gave her cousin's name. Your cousin?
Yeah. Yes,
she gave her cousin's name because she didn't want to get in trouble. And that worked out just fine, except she never showed up to pay the ticket or anything else. She just
oh my
let it
God.
go.
So they got an FTA?
Right?
Yes.
It's an FTA for the wrong person.
Oh.
Then she got stopped again. And she figured it worked so well the first time, according to her.
Why not?
She gave her cousin's name again.
This must be her favorite cousin.
And what did you get stopped for the second time, Ms.
There
Johnson?
it comes.
Running a stoplight.
In what jurisdiction do you live?
Los Angeles.
She again gave her cousin's name.
Well, can I explain the first time, you know?
Hear that? Even the audience doesn't want to hear it.
Hey, no, audience,
I don't
quiet.
think it's funny at all. So let me go further, and then we're going to get the details of this fiasco, because, you know, I like to sort of lay out the situation. So she gives her cousin's name twice. Her cousin finds out about it. How?
I was getting insurance on my car, and the lady notified me that my license was suspended, and I had 2 tickets on my record. And I could not get insurance until the license was cleared up.
So your license, they suspended your license?
Yes, ma'am.
You're lucky they didn't issue a warrant for your arrest.
Yes. And this was,
Yeah,
I was driving
I'm actually
around.
surprised
I didn't
about
find
that,
out
too.
till, like 10 months later that my license, it has been suspended 5 months before I even knew about it.
So she and her cousin discuss it, and she decides to do the responsible civic thing and goes to court and pleads guilty.
I plead guilty.
Yeah, she pleads guilty.
Okay.
And and they assess her fines.
Why?
And this is what the case is about. She wants her cousin to pay the fines, all the fines, for the 2 tickets she got.
Your Honor.
And the cousin says, I don't know. We're family. Because I was trying to understand what your defense is. So before I go on, I want to tell you both the following. What you did was a crime, Miss Key. Do you know that?
No.
Well, I'm going to explain that to you. When you go into court and you pled guilty, someone said to you, raise your right hand, you swear to tell the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
And then they said to you, what is your name?
Yep.
Dwani Key.
And you told them your name.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said, how are you pleading? You said, I'm pleading guilty. And you're pleading guilty because you were guilty.
No, ma'am.
Well, that's what you were doing. When you enter a plea of guilty, what you're doing is you are perpetrating a fraud on the court. Do you understand that?
Yes, ma'am.
That's a crime.
Pause it. She committed perjury. By lying under oath, because oftentimes, and I got this too whenever I got a ticket, it's more than just a matter of pleading guilty. And the last time I did this, the judge would ask you the questions. They would ask you, are you, not only about the waiver of your rights when you plead guilty, but often the judge also asked me about the facts of the case. Like, do you admit that on this day, at this time, you were stopped for this infraction, and then are you admitting to having caused the infraction, yada, yada, yada. The judge will usually ask you about to ensure the facts of the case. I can only assume that they probably did that the same for her. They didn't simply accept her guilty plea and have a nice day. So she committed perjury. Absolutely.
And I was mistaken on the facts of the case. I know that she was drinking before one of those 2 incidents because it gets brought up later. But the part of this that I thought was most interesting is how Judge Judy, acting as an arbitrator, responded to the facts of this case. We got a good enough lay of the land of what happened before. So now we are a little more than halfway through, and she's just sent the defendant out of the courtroom to get her pocketbook. And before this, she had claimed that she has a state ID with her, but she does not have a driver's license because she did not drive to court. And at some point, she also apparently picked up a new car, a new Cadillac, I think, or maybe a used Cadillac. So when we rejoin the action, it's after the break, and she's bringing her pocketbook in. Let's watch.
Her identity during 2 traffic stops. Tatiana claims on the first occasion, she was drunk.
Empty your pocketbook.
I'm not sure how that's a defense, but here we go.
I'll take it.
So that's her ID.
Now empty your pocketbook.
Now she's being told to empty her pocketbook.
I want the driver's license.
I don't have the driver's license here.
Then empty your pocketbook.
You want me to take everything out of my purse?
I want you to give me your driver's license.
I didn't bring it. I didn't drive today.
Unless this court receives your driver's license, madam, within 3 days, it is my intention to inform the police department in Los Angeles to confiscate your driver's license. Do we understand each other? Do we understand each other?
Yes. Can I ask why, though? I mean, this is like...
Because you perpetrated a fraud on the court. Her driver's license was suspended when yours should have been suspended. Don't you get that?
And I had a fake to appear.
Don't you get that? Your driver's license should have been suspended. You were driving, according to you, drunk. You got a speeding ticket. You gave somebody else's name. The second time, you did the same thing. You ran a red light and gave somebody else's name, and you still have a driver's license. Your driver's license should have been suspended.
And this is one of those situations where I see both sides of what Judge Judy is doing here. So on the one hand, she's explaining the legal aspects of what's going on, of what happened. Mm-hmm. And at the flip side is she's remorselessly tearing into the defendant for what she did. I mean, Artie, what's your take on this piece of it?
I mean, honestly, I have no issues with Judy's demeanor so far. She again, I'm not the biggest fan of like a straight up name calling by a judge. That's where I kind of draw the line. There's nothing wrong with a judge laying into somebody when you feel like they kind of need it, and there's nothing wrong with having a raised voice. There's something you cross the line when you go into actual like legitimate name calling and personal attacks, in my opinion. So I don't have any issue with her laying into the defendant for what she did, which was both legally and ethically like awful what she did to her cousin. But yeah, so I don't have any issues with it at all.
Okay. And this, in fairness, this is far from Judge Judy's harshest moment.
Oh, I've seen much worse.
Yeah. And I singled I singled this one out to kind of make a point as far as when they pick these cases, a lot of times they pick them for their value to the television audience, not necessarily because of there's a gripping legal discussion to be had. So
of course.
You might see a case like this in a real court 1 time out of 10, whereas on Judge Judy, this is like Artie said, this is a tame moment. So let's shift gears here. In the interest of time, Artie, here's a question. Have you ever heard the name Judge John McBain?
McBain? No.
McBain. So Judge John McBain is another Michiganian. He is a sitting judge in the 4th Circuit Court out of Jackson County, Michigan, elected in November 2002, and he actually served as chief judge of the court from January 2010 to December 2011. But he's gained notoriety, if that's the word, for being almost a real-life counterpart to Judge Judy. And at one point, he was even called out by an appellate court as a guy who's maybe in the wrong line of work. Not because of his temperament, although that was certainly part of it, but because he would knowingly hand down harsh sentences, knowing that they were excess, and I don't care what the appellate court would say, this is what I'm doing. It's something. So we've got a clip here of Judge McBain's remarks towards a killer that he had convicted. And this is a clip of a news story about a sentencing hearing. So let's take a look.
First caught on tape, an extraordinary courtroom outburst.
Not from the defendant or from the victim's family, but from the judge himself, outraged by a convicted killer's actions in the courtroom.
I think
and
I've
ABC's
seen
Barcy
this
Gonzalez
one.
has more on what
You
set
say
him
you've
off
seen
and
this
what
one?
he's now saying about it.
Well,
Barcy, good morning.
I think I've heard of it. It's been a long time. I may not remember this, but I think I've seen the thumbnail about this, about the judges, like that judge's look right there. I think I've seen that before.
You may know him from either this or the time he leaped off the bench and tore off his robe to help the bailiff secure a rowdy defendant. Tase his ass.
That may have been it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Morning, Dan and Biana. He says this was the most heinous, cold-blooded murder case he'd ever encountered. But this morning, the judge is speaking out to ABC News, explaining that wasn't the only reason he had such an extreme reaction.
You gutted him like a fish in that apartment, too. You were relentless. You stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed until he was dead.
This judge unleashing on convicted murderer Camilla Gamet, the 31-year-old in court being sentenced after a Michigan jury found her guilty of killing her boyfriend.
I also remember the cries of help that he screamed as you plunged that knife in and out of his body.
Gamet smirking, laughing, and rolling her eyes as the victim's family testified, setting Judge John McBain off.
And you're going to shut your mouth or I'm going to have some duct tape put on it.
Well, you talk.
All right, we'll wait here for a moment so we can get her quiet.
Some questioning his extreme reaction.
So in the interest of time, I'll stop it there, but that gives you an idea of this man's demeanor. So, I mean, what do you think about what you just saw?
It's very tough, especially in a sentencing hearing, and especially when the facts and circumstances of the case, can really pull on the emotional heartstrings. So as a human, I understand where I can understand when a judge kind of loses it, depending on the situation, depending on the case. God knows that I've read about many horrifying cases where the defendant did something absolutely terrible, shows absolutely no remorse whatsoever. It happens. It's going to happen. With that being said, the judge is supposed to be a professional in the first place. That's part of his job, is to remain professional and collected, and to fly off like that may win a couple of points with certain audience, but it's, to a disinterested observer, it doesn't look good, ultimately, and it doesn't really look good for the profession, because the judge, because again, I've said this before, and I'll say it again throughout this entire discussion. You can make a stand, you can lay into somebody who deserves it while still remaining professional. And again, I've seen that before, where a judge basically goes on a verbal smackdown on a defendant, yet remained level-headed and collected throughout. And you could do both. You don't need to be so expressive to demonstrate what, the rest of the community may also be feeling at the same time.
Right. So like Artie said, a judge needn't necessarily be totally emotionless during a proceeding in order to remain fair and impartial. Our next judge had doubtless some strong feelings about the goings-on in his courtroom, but he took a firm hand nevertheless, while remaining calm and collected. You may have heard the name Judge Belvin Perry Jr., that is, if you live in Orlando, Florida. Once upon a time, he was a sitting judge in the 9th Judicial Circuit. Of course, he retired in 2014, and since then, he served as a personal injury attorney at the Orlando law firm of Morgan & Morgan. During his time on the bench, he provided over some fairly interesting cases, including one that grabbed headlines once upon a time. But as part of that case, which I won't describe in order to preserve the audience's view of him, an issue emerged with a juror, and for certain conduct, the juror received 6 days in jail. Let's take a look.
Okay, sir, would you state your name and age?
My name is Matthew Bartlett, and I am 28 years old.
Mr. Bartlett, I'm going to have the court deputy show you these 3 pictures, which will be Court's Composite Exhibit 1.
And we don't see what the photos are.
You recognize the individual contained therein on that photograph, sir?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and who is it?
This is me.
Okay. And what is that symbol that you are projecting with your fingers?
Using my middle finger, and I am sorry.
Okay, and what does that mean, sir? When you extend one's middle finger.
Well, in American circles, it means "fuck you."
What does it mean to you, sir? Not to some, but to you.
Give the judge this one, because he's making the guy squirm.
Use the F word to someone.
And who were you extending the finger to, sir?
Mr. Ashton.
And what was Mr. Ashton doing at that time, sir?
Let's skip ahead. Pay attention to the sign that the judge is about to hold up.
You see this sign?
Yes, sir.
And does not this sign read any gestures, facial expressions, or audible comments showing approval or disapproval during a court proceeding is absolutely prohibited? That sign is posted on the door outside, is it not?
It is.
Okay. How far have you gone in school?
12th grade.
Can you read and write?
Yes, sir.
Did you not read this sign, sir?
I I have read that.
He's having fun with this.
And when you came in this morning, did the court deputy give you the benefit of reacquainting you with the ground rules in this proceeding about gestures, expressions?
Yes, sir.
What do you recall that court deputy saying?
There shall not be any gestures or facial expressions.
Was there anything about that that you did not understand, sir?
No, sir.
Sir, pursuant to Rule 3.830 of the Florida Rules of Criminal Procedure, could you tell this court why you should not be held in contempt of court for failing to comply with posted signage and directions that were given to you orally, which this court ordered posted, and required that the court deputies advise you orally why you should not be held in contempt of court?
And do you imagine that he had a good answer to that question?
Oh, I can't wait to hear it.
For gesturing by pointing your middle index finger, which you told us is the F word, to Mr. Jeffrey Ashton.
Oh, it's a slow burn. I love it.
At the time, in open court, while this court was present. Can you tell me any reason why you should not be
he's
held?
just twisting the knife, digging.
I'm truly sorry for doing this. This is something stupid, and I'm not sure why I even did it. And I just apologize. I don't understand why I did it.
Well, there was a reason why.
So, to recap, we have someone who is 28 years old, also known as old enough to know better, who saw sign after sign after sign and was told it verbally by a security officer, and he did it anyway. And like you said, the judge had a lot of fun with this guy, as right he should have, I think. So now that we've gotten through it, this is actually a clip from the Casey Anthony trial over which this judge presided. So this clip is very old, but to me this shows what a judge should do in order to maintain order in their courtroom. I mean, Artie, what do you think?
I think he's brilliant. I think it's actually absolutely brilliant in that he's laying it all out in front of everybody, why he's there, why he's being held in contempt, and he doesn't need to raise his voice to make this guy squirm standing up there. Like, I almost heard him hyperventilate for a little bit there. So this is a perfect example of what you can do to lay into somebody without raising your voice, and also remind yourself or remind people in the court who's in charge. So I think it's perfect, absolutely perfect.
I fell in love. This is one of a number of clips from these proceedings where the judge had to take actions like this, and it's of them all, this one is my absolute favorite. So yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that. So at the top of our show, we told you about a judge in Michigan that was described as the worst judge ever by at least one attorney that had been up before her more than once. And it seems like secondhand accounts described her as that, if not worse. So what ultimately happened to her? Well, the saga was long and twisted, but it did finally reach a conclusion. Let's take a look at a news story that describes how the caper went down.
Former Livingston County Judge Teresa Brennan is headed to jail tonight. She pleaded guilty last month to perjury in her own divorce case. The sentencing judge told Brennan she violated every oath she has taken to uphold the law and gave her the maximum 6 months. 7 Action News reporter Jim Kurtzner is live in Howell tonight, where Brennan begged for mercy. Jim?
I've covered Teresa Brennan for 3 years, a long process, oust her from the bench in the criminal case. She's never spoken about her personal trouble until today. You worried about going to jail? I think you should go to jail. She would walk into a standing room only courtroom with supporters and many who had been in her court over 13 years. She spoke for an emotional 7 minutes, saying she contemplated suicide.
My suffering reached a point to where I wondered how to die. A gun.
Oh my God.
Pills. Hanging. Drowning. Driving into a tree. Asphyxiation. But I'm not that weak.
And summed herself up with this.
This has humbled me. I don't feel sorry for myself. I blame only myself. I know I have much to be grateful for. I ask for mercy.
She asked for probation, the visiting judge from Detroit having the final word about her actions.
Actions, which are utterly unacceptable for a person who took an oath many times, or a couple of times, to uphold the law, required others to tell the truth.
The sentencing guidelines in the guilty plea were 0 to 6 months, the judge imposing the max.
6 months in the county jail, followed by 18 months probation.
Many in court applauded the sentence. Tom Kaiser's a former prosecutor, was the divorce attorney who jammed up Brennan.
I'm not a bit surprised, frankly. I think he should have got the 6 months. I'm proud to say that he's a judge. And, you know, he listened to her, he listened to everybody, and he did his job.
Brennan was given a secure escort out, not commenting on what many believe was a surprise sentence. No comment at all?
That's right, no comment.
She reports for jail 1 week from today at 9 a.m. She's certain to be disbarred, but she could collect her county pension. Live in Howell, Jim Kurtzner, 7 Action News.
All right, Jim, it has been quite the saga.
And Judge Brennan was ultimately disbarred by, I believe the disbarring body was the Michigan Supreme Court. But considering what we heard about her from Steve Leto earlier, Artie, can you honestly say that outcome surprises you?
No. I think I tend to be somebody who believes that elected officials like judges or prosecutors who commit those kinds of actions, that needs to be an aggravating factor if they are convicted of wrongdoing in terms of sentencing, and also given her apparent reputation leading up to this, I don't think it was that much of a surprise either that she would get the max sentence. So again, I don't know much about her. I'm going to be very curious, after we're finished here, to kind of learn a little bit more about her, because I'd never really heard of her before. I've heard of other judges doing wrong. I've actually highlighted a couple of the judges who had done wrong last year. But Miss Brennan, I'd never heard of until now. But I'm very curious as to what went on.
Well, if you do a video on it, make sure you let us know, because that is something I would be very interested in seeing.
Of course, definitely.
Artie, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you very much for having me on. It was very fun. I enjoyed looking at these videos and kind of getting a sense of, the difference between, TV and reality. Yeah, we'll see. Again, we'll see you next time, and I appreciate, again, you having me on and inviting me on to your channel.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Now, for more from Artie, make sure you subscribe to his channel, Artie's Corporate Fiction. You'll get just as much entertainment as you get from information. And the entertainment may or may not come from what happens when technical difficulties strike, so you never quite know what you're going to get. Now, in all seriousness, Artie's channel is great, and you should go subscribe if you haven't already. But meantime, that's all we've got. As always, I appreciate you tuning in, and until next time, this is Brandon Bridges reminding you the best way to be is B squared. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Screw Flanders.
Stupid, sexy Flanders.
It's like I'm wearing nothing at all.